Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food in whatever space you have available. And I do this by sharing exactly what's been going on in my own allotment and my own vegetable garden here in Littlehampton in the UK. I've been growing my own for over 30 years, but I still learn something new every single day. Now, coming up this week, I thought it would be time to see if we've got any compost from the hot bin, something that we've been trialling out throughout this summer. Added to that, we've also been down the allotment where we're sowing some green manures, and towards the end I'm looking at why we grow our own food. So, without much ado, let's go find out what's going on with the hot bin. Well, here I am in the kitchen garden, and I have been trialling out a hot bin this year. Now, if you don't know what a hot bin is, it's a type of compost bin, insulated so it holds onto all that heat and it can produce compost in a very, very short amount of time. This is all purely down to the fact that it's holding onto the heat. That's what makes it so quick. Now, what we've been doing throughout this year, back in May I set up the hot bin and I have been next to it a Dalek compost bin, and I have been filling both of these compost bins up with the same amount of compost material. This is lawnmower clippings, weeds that have been shredded, prunings, wood chippings, shredded paper, you name it, it has gone into these compost bins, even kitchen waste for that matter. One of the key things I have been doing, however, is laying. So we would put a layer of greens, our lawn clippings for example, and a layer of browns, wood chippings for example. Now, I'm going to open the Dalek compost bin first of all. The Dalek compost bin, I've got to say, it's pretty much full of compost material, but it doesn't seem to be doing very much. I'm just going to grab the rake and have a sort of play around and see if anything is happening. And I can tell you that it's not really produced much compost. The heat isn't too bad. It's on the lower end of, well, about 55 degrees, so the lower end of what we would want it to be. But are we seeing any compost? No, absolutely no real compost material being made in this at all. So, that's not unexpected. It might be a little bit on the dry side, to be fair. It could do with a drop of water. So, let's put the lid back on that. If we open the lid of the hot bin, the top, and what I can see, it's already, the heat in this I can feel is much, much better than the Dalek compost bin. Much hotter. And if I just give it a bit of a stir around with the rake that it comes with, and I can see we've potentially got some compost there. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to stick the thermometer back in. Again, the thermometer is up in the 60s, so quite a bit warmer than the Dalek compost bin. But I'm going to open the front door and just see if we actually have got any oh, wow! Yes, we do. We have got compost. That beautiful black gold that is just looking and smelling really, really healthy. Now, this is what we want. We want that black gold. We want that compost because it is good for our garden. Now, this is quite good. I reckon I've probably got a good 40-50 litres of compost in that. Now, not all of it has rotted down. The stuff on the top is going to take a little bit longer to rot down and turn to compost, but I don't mind that, because what I've got in there is enough to do what I want to do. And what that is I'm going to take that compost out and use it as a mulch around some of my plants. Now, this is something that I do a lot of, mulching. Now, for me, mulching is as important as watering or feeding our plants. I tend to use a lot of mulch. Compost is my absolute favourite mulch, and all I do is I take out that compost, that probably 40-50 litres of compost that I've got there. I will then just spread it on the soil around some of my plants, and what this will do is it will shade out that soil. It will stop any weeds, or reduce the amount of weeds I should say, from growing. More importantly, it reduces the amount of loss of water by evaporation just by shading out that soil. But the other good thing, this is what I really want it to achieve, is that it adds organic matter and nutrients to the soil. This is one of the reasons that I do no-dig gardening, because all I've got to do is just lay that compost on top of the soil. The worms will come along, they will pull that compost material down into the soil and do the work for me. I don't need to dig, the worms do the work for me. But what that does is it just adds all those nutrients, all that goodness into the soil and produces good, healthy soil. For me, to be successful at growing your own veg, it's all about having good, healthy soil. Healthy soil is full of life, full of bugs and worms and nature, but also full of organic matter, bits of wood, bits of rotted material. You know, all that compost just in the soil adds life, organic matter, and more importantly, the nutrients that plants need to grow. So, we've still got a long way to go with the hot bin, but I've proven already it has produced compost in a much faster way than our standard Dalek compost bin. So that's proving to be very, very successful. Now, we do have a discount code available if you are looking to buy a hot bin from Hot Bin Composting website. Links and details on that are, of course, on the blog post for this episode. Now, what else have I been doing this week here in the kitchen garden? Well, the driveway path is nearing completion. We've made massive progress on that over this last week. I won't go into the details for that because I'm going to save that for when it is completed, which looks to be next week. But because I just feel a little bit better about it, I've ventured out into the vegetable garden a little bit more and felt like I could actually tackle things. I've got on top of the weeding, I've tidied the beds up, but I've also planted out some more of our winter cabbages. Now, winter cabbages are something I am growing a lot of this year, just purely because I like winter cabbages. And it's also about just making sure that there is something growing in the garden all year round, and winter cabbages certainly fit that bill. Now, these winter cabbages were sown a couple of months back, so they've been slowly growing in their pots and they look really healthy, good looking plants. What I do is I just dig a hole, I dust that hole with a bit of garden lime to adjust the pH to make it more suitable for our cabbages, pop the cabbage into that hole, firm it down around, give it a good watering in, and that should be okay. All I've had to do, of course, is just water those cabbages on a daily basis just to try and make sure that they stay established. Now, in terms of harvests, we've actually been harvesting quite a few bits of food. Radicchio has been one of our favourites this week, that bitter tasting leafy crop. Beetroot, we've had courgettes, some lovely courgettes I've got to say, tomatoes, cucumbers, pretty much everything you can imagine, just right at this time of year. But the fruits this year have been the real star of this year. Raspberries are looking great. They've been nice and early this year as well. Blackberries, also nice and early. But apples, we're harvesting apples now, which is really early compared to what it is normally like. But that's the way this year is. I think this year has been the year of the fruits. The one I'm really looking forward to is my grapevines. I've got a grapevine around my seating area, and that is just full of bunches of grapes on it, which I cannot wait till they're ready for harvesting because they are going to be so sweet and so tasty. So it's been a good week here in the kitchen garden. Things are moving forward as always, but more importantly, we've been able to get some really good compost out of the hob bin composter. Very, very happy with that, to say the least. Right, I'm going to head on down to the allotment. If you'll meet me down there in just a moment. In the meantime, let's find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week. Well, it's indeed that time of the podcast where we ask you to do me a little favour. And that is, if you are enjoying this podcast, then please do give us a rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us, and it helps us get found by more people who might also want to know more about how to grow their own food. Not only that, if you are also enjoying this podcast and you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. By being a member, you help keep the wheels on this podcast running. It helps support the financial side of this podcast. But in return, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcast twice a week that give you a bit more idea of what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. But not only that, once a month you will also receive through your letterbox our monthly seed pack, and that seed pack contains a monthly mini newspaper which covers a whole host of tricks and tips that you might find useful. But you also receive on average 6 packets of seeds in that pack as well, and those seeds can be sown in that very month, and all that is just £5 a month. I think it's an absolute bargain, and I would love to have you there as well. Now this week we have actually been sowing some of those seeds. We've sown some oregano or oregano, depending on how you pronounce it, a delicious Mediterranean herb. We've also sown some mustard, another delicious herb that is going to be featured in just a moment, funnily enough. If that sounds like something you would be interested in, then please head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more and sign up. Right, back to the gardening. Well, I'm sorry to say that I am not actually on the allotment for this recording. I did actually record something down the allotment, but when I brought it into the editing suite, it was 10 minutes of empty recorded. Something had gone wrong, but I do recall what I had said. So, been down on the allotment, and I've obviously in the evenings I've noticed it is getting a little bit darker, a little bit earlier, and it's becoming quite noticeable. Now, of course, it is expected around this time of year. August, it generally is starting to get dark around 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. Most of us are probably indoors by this point, but I'm sure there's still plenty of gardeners who will be out there at that time of night, down on their allotments, tackling a few jobs. I certainly have been trying to go down the allotment every night on the way home from work, just tackling a few tasks, trying to take care of the land and making the most of my time here. And it's paid off. It's really becoming quite easy to look after. The mulches with straw have helped massively. I won't go into that too much because I keep talking about the straw mulch a lot on my podcasts lately. However, one of the things that we have been doing is, of course, harvesting. We've had plenty of cabbages and cauliflowers, all of which are going down rather well. Potatoes, we've had beans and peas, courgettes and other squashes, cucumbers, tomatoes. It's been a real good harvest time. And I mentioned already that our fruits are particularly good at this time of year. But one of the things I have realised, and I've always said that gardening is about thinking ahead, planning ahead. And this is often overlooked aspect of gardening, especially when we see TV programmes that show an instant impact. Well, plants grow. They take time to develop. They take time to grow to their surroundings. And certainly when it comes to vegetables, it takes time for those vegetables to grow from seed. And often this means we have to think 10 steps ahead. So while I was harvesting some of my cabbages and my cauliflowers this week, I have made a realisation that towards the end of next month, end of September that would be, and into October, where my current cabbages and cauliflowers are growing, those beds are going to be needed for my garlic and my overwintered onions. Now you might be thinking, well, surely if you've got cabbages growing into the winter, that's going to be needed for cabbages. And you'll be right. Luckily, my winter cabbages are in another bed, so it's not going to come into effect necessarily on these beds. But where we still have cabbages and cauliflowers that aren't quite ready for harvesting, but the soil is going to need a bit of preparation in order to make sure it's ready for garlic. So what I've been doing, obviously I've cleared all the weeds to make sure they are weed free. And then I've sown a green manure. Well, a plant that I'm treating as a green manure anyway, but it's also a plant that is edible in many forms. It's mustard. Now, mustard is a fantastic green manure, and it's one that I do actually sow quite often. I sow mustard to be an edible crop anyway, because I like the leaves in salads. I also like to use the seeds that it produces to make things like mustard powder and mustard sauce. But the plant itself can also be used as a green manure. It's quite a quick growing crop. So in between my existing cabbages and cauliflowers that some have been harvested, some have not, I have sown this mustard. Now what this mustard is going to do is going to create a bit of a blanket cover on the empty soil, which just helps stop anything being washed away when it rains. It covers the soil to stop any weeds popping up. And when we hoe it down before we plant our garlic, it's going to add that organic matter into the soil as well. So mustard is one I'm using. Now you might be thinking, well, hang on, if you've got cabbages still growing now, what I'm planning to do is to have the mustard growing alongside the cabbages. We're going to continue harvesting the cabbages and cauliflowers between now and when we need to get the garlic in. Hopefully they will all be harvested by that point. And then obviously all the roots are going to be left in the ground. All we will do is just chop everything down to ground level, leave everything on the surface to sort of rot down, a bit like chop and drop that we spoke of last week. Then we will add a layer of compost, give that a couple of weeks, and then our garlic and our onions will be planted into those beds. It's fairly easy. It's just about trying to make sure we don't have any bare soil. And this is one of those experiments that I'm trying out to see if it works. Hopefully this is going to work out. I will let you know if it does or doesn't, no matter what. But for me, green manures are a great tool to have in our arsenal of weapons on our allotments. Now, I sow a lot of green manures over winter because I purely want them to look after the soil. Where we're going to be planting our potato beds in next year, that was my bean beds this year, bean and pea beds. Those are going to have a spud mix that I get, and they help fumigate the soil, clear any nasty bugs that might attack our potatoes when they're growing. But they also add nutrients to the soil, and they're a great source of compost material at the same time. Phacelia is another one that is one of my favourites that we also sow into the autumn to get them growing over the winter, just to add some extra nutrients. Field beans is another one that we will sow as well. But there's a whole wide range of different green manures that we can use, and I highly recommend, if you have any spaces that are not going to be filled, then sow green manures. Now, one of the other things that I mentioned is that gardening is, of course, about thinking ahead, and this is where we often try and sow so many seeds. We are sowing seeds every single day, and the reason for that is that I want crops that when space becomes available in my allotment or in the kitchen garden, I can pop those plants in its place. This is all making sure that we have no bare soil. At the moment, I've got plenty of kale, plenty of chard, plenty of spinach, plenty of lettuce, all of which can be used as these fill-in crops. If you haven't got any of these growing, I highly recommend you get those sown as well. Now, that has been our main focus down on the allotment, which means it's time for Chef Scott. Let's see what he's got for us this week.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef Scott with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive.
Scott here with this week's recipe, and this week we have the Seed of the Month recipe. And as you will know, the Seed of the Month is pak choi, and I like to pair it with a flavoured butter. And this week's recipe is miso and lemon butter with stir-fried pak choi. So, let's head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. As usual, you can find this recipe and others on the veggrowpodcast.co.uk and on my Instagram page, Seed to Table Plot 13. For this recipe, you will need 250 grams of softened butter, 40 grams of white miso, 10 grams of grated ginger, 5 grams of diced red chilli, 5 grams of chopped coriander, the zest and juice of 1 lemon, and freshly picked pak choi. Method: mix all the ingredients together, then roll the butter mix in some greaseproof paper into a sausage shape, and then chill until needed. Now stir fry the pak choi with as much of the butter as you like. And that's the recipe done, and that's it from me this week.
Well, once again, thank you to Chef Scott for another delicious recipe. Next week, Chef Scott will be on holiday, so he's not going to have a recipe for you, but I'm going to come up with something for you instead. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. But I hope Chef Scott has a lovely, lovely holiday. Now, I have been having a lot of conversations lately about why we grow our own food, because a lot of people are getting interested once again in growing their own food, and for a variety of reasons. And I would ask you, what are your reasons for growing your own food? There's no right or wrong answers for this. For some people, it's about just being able to save money on their grocery bills by growing their own food. For some people, it's about knowing where their food comes from. For some people, it's also about food security, and all of which I admire and I think are good reasons to grow their own food. But if you've got an answer, please do send us an email and tell me your answer to that very question. Now, I've been growing my own food since I was 10 years old, and I started growing my own food just as an instinct. My grandfather was a keen grower owner, grew up on a plant nursery, so it just felt like an instinct to me to start growing my own food. But it was also there to try and support my parents and help them out and reduce the food bill a little bit more by growing my own food and bring that food into the kitchen that we grew in the garden. This was in the early 90s, so back then growing your own made more sense to save money. And I say that because I keep track of how much we spend on our gardening and how much we produce. And what I've often found is that when I compare the cost of the food to what we could buy in a supermarket in the economy level, the basic level, we more or less break even. We're not really saving any money. But that's not a bad thing. That is not a bad thing. And the reason I say it's not a bad thing is that we can often look at areas that we want to save money in by scrimping and saving. Maybe not buying so much compost and producing more of our own, for example. Maybe not buying an extra water butt if we don't need it, that sort of thing. However, one of the things I've always said when we grow our own food is that we may be paying economy prices for our food, but we are getting premium quality food. Now, I often say that when we grow our own food, the food that we produce is equivalent, if not better, than farm shop food. What I mean by that is that the food that we harvest is generally fresher because it's come from your garden straight onto the plate within minutes in some cases. So because it's fresher, it's got more nutritional value to it. It's full of those minerals that we need, those nutrients that we need to grow healthy and strong. But I've also noted that the food that we grow our own is always tastier as well. Carrots, for a great example, carrots taste so much better when we grow our own. I'm a big lover of all these vegetables, of course. I'm also consider myself a bit of a foodie in that I do like my food. I do eat way too much food, if I'm honest. But that's because I love the flavour. I love the taste of good quality food. So In answer, growing my own is not to save money, but it's to give me good, high quality food. But there's also an aspect that I consider myself to be a very self-sufficient person. I remember as a child, I would watch a program called The Good Life, which was a bit of a comedy series about how this couple would basically try and live off grid. And I've always admired that. That's something I've always admired. I do like the idea of living off grid. I don't think it would be necessarily something I would fall into, but it's definitely something I like the idea. And certainly being self-sufficient in food is something that we strive to do. Obviously, we're never going to be self-sufficient in all the food that we eat because we do eat meat, and I don't have cows and sheep and what have you running around the garden. That just isn't practical. But we do have chickens. We used to have quail. We're self-sufficient in eggs and our vegetables and things like that. So self-sufficiency has been a key thing for me, and it's something that we are striving to achieve. And I think with what we're hearing at the moment about the cost of living and the price of food just getting more and more expensive, I think more and more people are going to be turning their gardens over to kitchen gardens like what I've done. Often it's a case when food gets expensive, people look at saving money, and growing your own is something that they return to. Now, I don't often go to a supermarket, so my wife is the one who does the supermarket trips, purely because I'm not the nicest person in a supermarket. But she tells me that the cost of food is just getting higher and higher, and this has been backed up by what I've heard on social media, through friends and on the news. Food is getting expensive once again. So what I often try and do as well, when I grow my own food, I do try and give away any surplus to people who need it more than me. Many of us are probably having too many courgettes at the moment, so giving those away to friends, family, neighbours, or even just getting people passing in the street is a good thing. We have a local community fridge, which is a place dedicated to sharing surplus food with those who need it as well. So food banks are a good example as well of somewhere to share some of that food that we have in excess. But one of the things I've also been thinking about is the prepper community, the doomsday preppers. Now, a few years ago, again, I did a lot of watching TV programs and researching into doomsday preppers. And I kind of liked the idea. Again, this comes back to the self-sufficiency side. Now, I do not believe that any of these doomsday scenarios, end-of-world scenarios, are likely to happen at all. But I have always had on the edge of my mind that tragedy and bad things can happen to us all. And it could be as simple as losing a job. What would you do if you lose a job? And this is again where Grow Your Own can come in. Having that backup of knowing that I've got food growing in my garden, we're not going to go hungry if I lose my job, gives me peace of mind to think that. So those are a few reasons why I grow my own food. And as I said, I would love to hear your reasons as well. If you do want to share your reasons, you can of course email me. richard@veggrowpodcast.co.uk is my email address. Of course, you can reach out through the website, veggrowpodcast.co.uk, where you can leave a comment on the bottom of a blog post, or you can leave us a voicemail. While you're on our website, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grow Podcast Supporters Club. Helps keep this podcast running. But you can also support us by leaving us a comment, or leave us a rate and review, as I say. We've had a comment from Lynn on Spotify. She says, "Hi Richard. Yes, the wasps are out in force this year. Accidentally hoed over a nest at the plot. They were not happy. Managed to quickly bury my face in my t-shirt, but unfortunately they got inside my baggy trousers. The result was about 15 stings on my legs. Not good. I'm also really hoping to be successful growing pak choi for the first time, but the heat wave may delay my sowing attempts. Fingers crossed. Wish me luck, Lynn." Good luck, Lynn. I'm looking forward to seeing how you get on. You're probably right to delay your sowing attempts for now, but yeah, good luck. Good luck. Right, it is time for me to get on out of here. Apologies for not having a recording from the allotment. I'll double check that every time I record moving forward. It's never happened before that I can recall, but it's always something that can happen. Technical issues. Right guys, I will be back again next time, so until then, please take care.